To everyone, and welcome to this public event to talk about Bill C-51, the Conservatives' new anti-terrorism bill, and its implications for civil liberties. My name is Max Haiven. I am assistant professor in the Division of Art History and Critical Studies at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, and I'm also co-director of the Radical Imagination Project, which is one of the co-sponsors of this event. And I'm also a member of a new group in Halifax called the Halifax Civil Liberties Working Group, which involves a number of us, and we would like it to include you as well. A little later in the afternoon, we'll pass around a sign-up sheet that will allow you to sign up for more information or to volunteer for that organization. Essentially, it's a group of concerned Halifax citizens who want to move towards forming some sort of civil liberties association, which might not only be able to do public education on civil liberties, such as this event, but also perhaps have some sort of legal presence or impact on civil liberty issues here in Halifax. And so we thought, as one of our first events, we would host this public meeting to discuss the implications, the dangers of Bill C-51, specifically how those dangers might affect social movements and civil society in Canada, and also how this bill might be successfully opposed, or how we might continue our opposition even if the bill does indeed pass through Parliament. Very briefly, I would say that our vision of civil liberties is fairly broad at this point in time. We're thinking about civil liberties on the one hand in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, other rights that are enshrined in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, but we also are interested in civil liberties as they affect policing, as they affect the abuse of authority by police, by other authority figures, in prisons and elsewhere, and we're interested in issues of equity and social justice as well. So when we speak about civil liberties, we're really talking about defending the best aspects of our society, those aspects of our society that we have struggled to maintain and that we are now struggling to defend against a number of legal and parliamentary attacks. So it's in that spirit that we wanted to bring together the panel of speakers we've prepared for you today, and I'm very pleased to welcome them. I'll introduce them now, and then I'll tell you we've asked them to speak on 3 questions, which I'll lay out before we go into their discussion. So first we will have Howard Epstein, who is a retired politician. He served as both a municipal councillor and as member of the Legislative Assembly here in Nova Scotia. He's a retired lawyer and a retired teacher from Dalhousie's Law School. What he has not retired from is civic engagement. He has been a supporter of civil liberties for a very long time. As far back as 1978, he worked with the then General Secretary of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association of Canada, Alan Borovoy, on securing reforms to mental health laws. He had his first close look at Canada's security apparatus during his first work experience as a lawyer when he was with the Federal Department of Justice and was assigned as in-house legal counsel to the Solicitor General's Department. Our second speaker will be Judy Haiven, who is a professor in the Management Department of the Sobey School of Business at St. Mary's University. She's a public intellectual and a committed community activist. In addition to being chair of the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives Nova Scotia, a progressive public policy think tank, she is active in trade union movement and in the wider community. She's a founding member of Canadians, Arabs and Jews for a Just Peace in Halifax and also of Independent Jewish Voices Canada. Both organizations seek to stop Israel's illegal and brutal occupation of Palestine. Recently, she's been working to help create the Civil Liberties Group here in Halifax. And then we have Elle Jones, who many of you will recognize as Poet Laureate of Halifax. She's a professor at Acadia University and has taught at other universities. And she is a prison rights activist, among many other forms of activism and cultural activism that she engages in Halifax. So we've asked them to speak on these 3 questions. The first is what they consider to be the most dangerous aspect of C-51, Bill C-51, sorry. The second is, what are the implications of Bill C-51 for social justice movements and social justice struggles in Canada? And the third is, what can be done at this point about Bill C-51 to oppose it, or if it indeed does pass, in that unfortunate circumstance, what can be done in the aftermath. And so I believe we'll begin with Howard. Would you like a microphone?
What's it going to do?
Amplify.
Okay, So I'm mostly going to ignore the 3 questions and meander my way through the talk that I structured for myself. So more than 40 years ago, when I had my very first job as a fledgling lawyer, I went to Ottawa to work with the Federal Department of Justice. And the way the system worked at the time is that the Federal Department of Justice assigned lawyers to all the other government departments to be their in-house legal counsel. And I was one of those lawyers. I was assigned, as it happens, to the Solicitor General's Department, which was in charge of the penitentiaries, the parole board, and the RCMP, plus a small working group inside the headquarters known as the Police and Security Policy Analysis Branch, which was the predecessor to what we now have as CSIS. So at that time, my security clearance was for top secret, and if I, in fact, had access to any serious secrets, I've long since forgotten them. And in any event, it was more than 40 years ago, and it was probably no longer really all that relevant, although something you probably would like to know is that when you're in receipt of a secret or top secret document, here's what happens, is that it's hand-delivered to you. Someone comes and actually gives it to you personally. They're obliged to do that. You can't put it in the inter-office mail, although it's not in fact marked on the outside that it's secret or top secret, but it is hand-delivered to you. And when you open the envelope, inside is the envelope, inside which is the secret or top secret document. And that second envelope is in fact marked with the secret or confidential or top secret classification. In my case, when I received such documents from the minister's office, it was usually an invitation to meet for lunch. So although I started out with something that is no doubt light and makes it sound as if it's trivial, that's not my view. I think, in fact, we have to understand that what we're dealing with here is something that is non-trivial. And so what I want to do is this. I want to remind us of what it is that intelligence gathering is actually supposed to be about. And then I want to make 3 points. First is that it probably doesn't matter what's in Bill C-51. Bill C-51 is no doubt a worsening of the situation in which we find ourselves, but that there is already a legal framework that exists that is highly problematic, and we should recognize that. The second is that the security apparatus that exists, not just in Canada, but throughout the world, and all of these entities speak to one another, are really not to be trusted in any way, because they've all been beset by scandals of one sort or another, whether that's going beyond their legislated mandate or whether it's engaging in things that are exactly the kind of activities that we don't want any of our governments to be involved with. And the third point I'm going to make is that civil liberties are crucial to our enjoyment of freedoms in Canada, and that we have to treasure them and we have to take care of them if we're going to do this. So let's go back and remind ourselves of what it is that intelligence gathering is actually all supposed to be about. The idea is that it is not law enforcement. The basic idea is that intelligence gathering is meant to be some kind of early warning system that is somehow oriented towards prevention, in the sense of seeking out conditions that lead to either espionage or sabotage or terrorism, but it's meant to be informational. It's meant to engage in generating thought positions for governments and primarily for governments, and to a secondary extent for society at large. But it's not necessarily about law enforcement. Law enforcement is meant to be something separate. Law enforcement is when an identifiable crime has been or is about to be committed, and that's the jobs of the police forces of one sort or another. So the idea, though, is that these things are somewhat distinct, and usually in most of the Western nations, these functions have been structured so as to keep them separate, so that the idea of intelligence gathering is not the same as actually arresting someone who is about to commit a crime or you think has committed a crime. It's meant to simply be that, intelligence, that is information gathering. So on the theory that prevention is better than cure in some sense. So that's the basic idea, and that's the starting point for our understanding of what it is that this often secret world is meant to be about. Although, of course, as we all know, it's hardly secret. A lot of it is available in some way. Although there's certainly clear limits to that. So my first point, you may recall, is after that, is that it really doesn't matter what's in Bill C-51. There certainly are some negative things. So, for example, preventive detention, the new addition to the criminal code is something that ratchets up the nature of the powers that are going to be available to government agencies. This is going to be highly problematic. The possibility that actions could violate the Charter of Rights, and what goes on in the secret world doesn't have to respect the Charter of Rights. This is all problematic, even though there are some built-in safeguards about judges approving in advance and so on. As we know that these are highly problematic, but the essence of this, though, is that we already have a system that's in fact not much different than that. And it's not much different than that because oversight and safeguards in the system are not actually all that effective. Everyone knows that we have something called CERC. This is meant to be the Security Intelligence Review Committee. This is not something that is a really effective oversight organization, and to the extent that it has been aware of problems with the agencies that it's meant to keep an eye on, it has issued a number of reports in the past that have indicated that there are serious problems with how the agencies operate. So we find that this is already a flawed system. And it's flawed not just in terms of the weakness of the oversight organization that's supposed to be in place, but it's flawed in the sense that there are already wishy-washy terms that are part of the legislative mandate of these organizations in the first place. So things like trying to assess the intentions or the ultimate intentions of targets of surveillance. This is something that is clearly an amorphous and potentially highly political approach to security and intelligence gathering that is obviously open to the possibility of abuse. When we're dealing with this kind of agencies with a fair bit of money at their disposal, we don't want vagueness or flexible terms or things that are capable of subjective interpretation inside those organizations. So, but we already have that. We have weak oversight, we have weak terms there, plus their existence already does a job which is problematic for civil society, which is that it delivers a chilling effect on free discourse. Because you never know when you're going to be involved in surveillance in the sense of being at the receiving end of surveillance. Who knows in this room who all of our compatriots are or what their purpose is in being here. It's a statement on behalf of our faith in our ability to live in an open society in Canada that we're all prepared to be here and to talk. And so this is a good thing, but it doesn't prevent someone having a file with your name on it and gathering as much data as they can about you. Given the nature of all the information that's out there on the internet these days, it's not all that hard to do to gather at least some basic information and to take actions that will send a message to people who would otherwise be active in civil society that they're being watched. And this is easily open to abuse, and from time to time we hear of individuals who report on visits they've had from CSIS and what the nature of those visits have been like, and the implied intimidation that goes along with it. And we already have that even without Bill C-51. And so we do have already an extensive system in Canada. The second point I want to make to you was that the agencies that we do have are not really to be trusted. And they're not to be trusted because of the extensive history that goes along with secret agencies of their abuse of their powers. You can look in virtually any part of the country, of the world, and you will find that there is a history of abuse, whether it's in France, the USA, including agencies that are supposed to be law enforcement agencies like the FBI, but also, of course, the CIA. Lots of abuse as to who they keep under surveillance. The UK has had it with MI5 and MI6. Certainly in Australia, there have been scandals in France as well. Germany, I'll speak to that in a little later on. But of course, we've also had it in Canada. Now, the reason we have CSIS in the first place, we should recall, is that intelligence gathering was in the night up until the creation of CSIS in the late 1970s, early 1980s, a function of the RCMP. There was a branch of the RCMP, and along with it, that little entity I referred to before, the Police and Security Policy Analysis Branch, that were involved in intelligence gathering, but it led to abuses. Many of them in Quebec. Some of them came to light, famously the burning and so on, but there were other objectionable activities and probably outright illegal activities carried on by the RCMP. When they came to light, there was the MacDonald Royal Commission that was created that heavily criticized what it was that the RCMP was up to, and essentially said that a non-police civilian organization separate from the RCMP, exactly what I described at the beginning, an intelligence gathering entity that was not responsible for law enforcement should be created in Canada. But it was the abuses in the first place amongst those who were in the RCMP and given the power to do intelligence gathering, surveillance, that actually led to that. Even though we had this entity created in Canada, CSIS itself has been beset by all kinds of problems. You only have to remember the serious problem with improper wiretapping around the Air India investigation that led, in fact, to the resignation of one of the first directors of CSIS. Subsequently, there was the Mayor Arar case that again led to more studies. This has been CSIS. This has been CSIS at work, that was supposed to be the independent agency operating with civilian oversight, and that was meant to be more respectful of what it is that are civil liberties. Germany is a nice example because of some of the writing and films that have been generated by what went on in Germany. Of course, in Eastern Germany, the GDR, there was a huge intelligence apparatus, and it's worth thinking about this and to remember that this is not some kind of tiny alien part of the world. This is not Myanmar, and this is not some country like Sri Lanka beset by violent internal fighting. This is a Western country that was very much like what we have in Canada in terms of its history and traditions. And so you have to imagine the possibility of the Stasi at work in Canada. One of the corrosive aspects of this is the recruitment of informants and infiltration of organizations that has been well documented. If you want to see a wonderful film, The Lives of Others is just a spectacular film. I see nods, quite a number of people probably have seen it, essentially about the kind of domestic spying that was going on internally in the GDR. Timothy Garton Ash has recently published a book that's a British historian about his own experience. It's called The File, and this is also something that it gives this is an example of someone who went and looked at the file that was kept on him. And many people have done this, and they've looked at the files and they've discovered that their neighbors, their friends, people with whom they shared housing were involved in keeping an eye on them and reporting back to the Stasi about this. Do we want this in Canada? I don't think so. It's wonderful that the GDR, in fact, has kept these records and have made them open and available so citizens can look back and see what it is that's going on, and they understand their history, because if you don't understand your history, you're not going to be able to change in the future. But it was corrosive to society at the time and continues to be corrosive for that society, which gets me to my third point, which is that civil liberties are just hugely important. Max in his introduction made reference to those those expressions of civil liberties that we have in Canada as written in our Charter of Rights. These are fundamental and are designed to be fundamental. That is, they're part of our Constitution. The idea is that you should not go beyond them. If we want to have a free and democratic society, then we have to respect freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, those things that are meant to be guaranteed to us in order to allow us to go on and live our lives in a way that we all aspire to. These are fragile. These are subject to being undermined by entities that do operate in secret and that use the modern tools that are available to them of bugging, of secret search, of mail opening, of electronic eavesdropping, of recruiting informants, of infiltration of organizations, of disruption now, and that is in fact what Bill C-51 now ratchets up the opportunity for, is that these tools that have often been allowed to be used by our secret agencies are now in fact going to be wider in their ambit, and that's why we should worry about Bill C-51. There are lots of things we can do about it, and I hope we get to that point in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. It's really a pleasure to see people come out here on a Saturday afternoon for this kind of panel discussion. I just want to say that I don't think CTV or ATV that was just here, they're probably, I don't know what they're feeding to the government or to the police forces. But as I sit here now, Max had asked us to answer 3 questions, and I guess I'm enough of a non-rule breaker. Not! But I'm respectful enough of Max that I'm answering the questions. So here we go. Max asked, what do we see as the most dangerous aspect of Bill C-51 in terms of civil liberties? And this is my response. This act sets a new standard for arrest and detention. If the police have a reason to suspect that someone or a group may commit a terrorist act, the police can arrest and detain those people. They can act on mere suspicion that arrest is likely to prevent any terrorist activity. Anyone's constitutional right to freedom of expression and assembly are now over. The new law will include speech that promotes and advocates, quote, terrorism in general, which is a very clumsy way of saying things, terrorism in general. People of color, Indigenous people, and others will be mostly targeted, as they are right now. Look what happened at LC Puck Dock a couple of years ago in New Brunswick. Look what happened at the G20 a mere 5 years ago when over 1,100 citizens in Toronto were arrested and detained in the most outrageous circumstances. The criminalization of dissent has started a long time ago in this country, and I'm afraid that it's ramping up. This bill has a huge chilling effect, as Howard mentioned too, on students, for instance, who will think twice before posting an article on Facebook. A church group which questions or pickets against military action against insurgents abroad, such as now we know the Saudis are dropping bombs on Yemen, and if a church group decided to be against that military action, since Saudis are our friends, I mean our government's friends I should say, this could be a problem. It's also a problem because journalists, and I was just speaking to the journalist at CTV just outside, journalists are now worried because they're afraid to be questioning the government on any of its activities. And they're afraid also that people will be added to terrorist groups and Canada's watch lists. Facebook's, all social media, let alone emails and websites, are part of the collection of metadata that we know from various reports on last summer. Glenn Greenwald, etc., has been reporting on this, that all of this is up for grabs and all of this is stored by the Canadian government. The next question is, how will Bill C-51 affect struggles for social justice in the future? Well, activists and others could be arrested. Under Bill C-51, there are increased provisions for preventive arrest, preventive detention, preventive restraints on liberty. Usually there's a protected right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, but not so under this bill. The Anti-Terrorism Act permits the arrest and detention of people who have not been convicted or even charged with an offence based on what they might do. Entirely innocent people could be swept up on mere suspicion. They can be arrested without warrant. Since 2001, actually, we've had this bad legislation, but this is like a bill on steroids. The Minister of Public Safety can, as we know, add anyone that he wants to the no-fly list on mere suspicion, and it's also almost impossible to get off the no-fly list once you're on. Finally, what do we think can be done to challenge or defeat Bill C-51? Well, we know that the bill is going to pass because of the Conservative majority, with small changes asked for by some parliamentarians. I think we have to go on the offensive. We have to have a Civil Liberties Association, and this working group is trying to work towards being able to establish that in the near future. I think we have to demand that this bill be repealed. We have to demonstrate more. We have to come to the aid of activists arrested or detained on these suspect charges. We have to make more trouble, not less. We have to work with the media to show them what's going on, because sometimes when I show them things, they say, oh, it's all too complicated, or, well, there's too many pages to read. But we have to show them that it's really quite a simple state of affairs. Seriously, we have to look at who are our friends. Are they the rich and powerful? Are they the police? I don't think so. I think our friends are Indigenous people, our friends are Muslims, our friends are African Nova Scotians and others that are people who need to be befriended by us. Just finally, Clayton Ruby wrote something interesting that was published in the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives in one of its magazines that I'm putting out on the back table, just near Marnina, the back white table. He wrote this: 6 Muslim young adults stand in front of a mosque late at night in heated discussion in some foreign language. They may be debating the merits of a new Drake album. They may be talking about video games or sports or girls or advocating the overthrow of the Harper Government. Who knows? There's no evidence one way or other, just stereotypes. But the new standard for arrest and detention, reason to suspect that they may commit an act, is so low that an officer could be inclined to arrest or detain them in order to investigate further. And now, officers will no longer need to ask themselves whether the arrest is necessary. They could act on mere suspicion that an arrest is likely to prevent any terrorist activity. Yesterday, the Muslim men were freely exercising constitutional rights to freedom of expression and assembly. Today, they are arrestable. Thank you.
Thank you. I stole the last position because then everybody else gets to say everything you need to say. But one of the things I did want to emphasize to start with, and I'm glad that it came up in both talks, is that, first of all, a lot of the conditions that are in this bill are conditions that are normal in communities of color. For example, the practice of carding, which we're seeing a sort of renewed, not renewed debate on, but...
Good afternoon. Kimberly Smith, your keys are at the second floor info desk.
I thought they were going to cater coffee.
So with the selection of the black police chief in Toronto, for example, where there's been sort of renewed debates about what does policing mean in black communities, and of course all candidates were for carding, which is the practice of stopping people with no suspicion, just, you know, and requiring ID and gathering information on them. So that's normal if you're a black man in particular in Toronto. I do urge Desmond Cole, did a really good piece on it. And then there's a really good video of Desmond Cole arguing with a bunch of people about why his experiences as a black man are real and based on racism. So, but these are normal practices. We know that, for example, in this province, Rocky Jones, who, you know, his house was burned down, right? He has talked about how he had a jewelry store in Scotia Square and it was broken into mysteriously where all his product is gone and nothing on either side is touched. You know, we know that the police had his phones tapped. We know there are records on him. So this has been taking place in communities of color, in black communities and Indigenous communities forever. So part of the question is that what is put upon our communities as normal conditions then becomes institutionalized into law and becomes enacted upon white communities, and then there's an outcry. And then it's like, oh no, we can't be surveyed. And it's like, but why can we be surveyed all the time? So I think it's very important to say that these practices start in Indigenous and Black communities. They're, in a sense, honed in these communities. The use of police as a terror squad within communities of color, and then those practices are imported outwards. The other thing I wanted to talk about with interpenetration is the interpenetration of sort of like prison activities, the way that prison surveillance into regular society as well. Angela Davis has talked about this in the sense of the world becoming as a prison, and a lot of the techniques that are used on prisoners that then move outwards. For example, I was looking at, like somebody posted this on my wall actually, the Brotherhood of Correctional Officers, and the post was, we have been asked to look at our population in the SHU and see how many are converting to Islam. In our small population, there are 11. This is clearly a fertile recruiting ground for ISIS. Be safe out there. And so it's like, but who asked you? You know, on what authority do you have this, right? So I mean, when we recognize that this stuff is being done to people who are incarcerated all the time. I actually met Justin Bork, weirdly enough, because he was at a visit at the same time as I was visiting. And the person I was visiting had ended up writing him a letter, and I lost my mind. I was like, are you fucking crazy? Like, are you stupid? Like, why would you write to Justin Bork? But all he wrote was, I enjoyed your manifesto, and I thought your point about terror in Canada was good, and your point about missing and murdered Indigenous women, like, why is Canada calling this the worst crime when we have 1,200 missing and murdered Indigenous women? That's what he wrote to him. But I'm like, you are so stupid, like, that's going to go on your parole file, and I was losing my mind telling him, because I'm just like, how could you do that? And he's like, well, I shook his hand at the visit. I'm like, oh, you know, why are you doing this? But what is wrong with that? Right? But under this system, you can't even write a letter to somebody and say, hey, I liked that thought you had, and here's my response to your thought. We're seeing that in our prisons, obviously, in the way that parole files are kept. I could talk about parole files forever. Somebody actually just called me yesterday, and he told me that his PO showed up and said, you know, by points, you're a medium. And everything I can do, I've shuffled the points as many times as I can, you're coming at medium. So he's like, so basically you're trying to add things in to make me a max. Like, he's in the max, he's trying to move. And she's like, you know, no matter what I do to the numbers, you're coming up a medium. But I just don't think you're a medium. So, and I mean, this kind of thing is acceptable now, right? That we have supposed processes, policies, laws, all of these things are supposed to be in place and supposed to guide us. But if you just don't feel, you know, if I just feel you're guilty, then you're guilty. You know, I don't know, there's no evidence against you, but I kind of feel you're a terrorist. So I'm going to detain you for 7 days. I'm going to laugh. But I mean, this is already what happens in our prisons and people's parole files. You know, minimizing your crime, manipulating people to meet your goals, not accepting, you know, like they have all this thing, which is really this kind of technique, which is, you know, using non-information in order to build information, and then, you know, so having books in your cell. You know, oh, you have Malcolm X in your cell, that means that you're a gang member, and we don't have to provide any information and intelligence on that. We can just seg you as a danger, and you're not going to find out. You know, and when you go to challenge your seg, they don't really have to tell you. They're supposed to tell you, but if they think it's endangering the security of the prison, they don't have to. You know, that is happening. People who write political work or write poetry who've had those, you know, non-conformist social views and are not getting parole as a result. Particularly people from communities of color that are not getting parole based on political beliefs, particularly Islamic beliefs. And what I'm saying is that we're looking at this within our prison system, and that's being imported to us as a sort of final intersection point. I don't know if you guys remember Drew Butler. I wanted him to come today to speak to us, but he just didn't feel like it really, like didn't feel up to it, I should say. But I don't know if you remember, the Coast did an article on solitary confinement. Jacob Boone did an article where he was uncovering the effects of solitary, and one person spoke on record, who was this guy Drew Butler, who really spoke up because he was like, well, I'm out and I can speak about this. So he talked about what he'd been through. One of the things he said is, due to his experiences, he was very angry as a result, and you know, putting him in solitary hadn't helped him. It had made him worse. It had made him antisocial, given him these issues. So that article had come out. And then there was, you know, the mall incident, the first mall incident in Halifax, where, you know, white people aren't terrorists, they're social misfits because they're not Muslims. So that happened. And then there was this, remember the supposed threat on the Micmac Mall? So I was supposed to meet up with Drew and bring him to this panel at the law school, which was ironically on incarceration in prisons. And then he's messaging me, and he's like, the police want to talk to me, kind of thing. And everybody's messaging me like, do you know where Drew is? Like, the police are looking for him, because they had called around to everybody. And they actually, I shouldn't say this on record, but they actually lied and said they were the Serious Incident Response Team, which is the people that investigate the police. So they were like implying that they were calling about this segregation issue and that they were interested in like police brutality and stuff, which wasn't true. Drew gets out of bed at noon and finds like, 1 million messages to him from everybody being like, the police are looking for you, they called. And this time the police have not gone into contact with him. They go to the mother of his child's house, they raid that house, they destroy the house with, a full SWAT team, looking for him to basically flush him out. Drew calls him up at this point and says, hey, you guys are looking for me, what's the problem? He doesn't know what's going on. Of course, it turns out that somebody submitted a false tip that he was a terrorist that was planning the mall bombing on the Micmac Mall. So, but I mean, they show up at his apartment. He has like the chief hostage negotiator on the phone. They're like not letting him get on the phone. They made him come and his sister come out, full hands up, 30 SWAT team, building surrounded, everybody evacuated. They come out and it's like the red lights pointing at you, full thing, like come out into the hallway with your hands up and saying I'm coming out. Like the full thing, destroyed the apartment, bring him down for interrogation. At this point he finds out, and what they're pulling out is this Coast article, right? So you said that you have antisocial views. So, are you angry? Do you feel angry about what happened to you? Do you feel like you want to blow up a mall? Like, they're asking these questions. And after about 2 hours, they realize, that he's not guilty. Mind you, all this time, I'm on Facebook with him, meaning that I'm now part of this terrorist cell, right? Because I'm like, don't talk to them, get a lawyer. I'm like, oh, fuck, because I thought it was just on, like, maybe he was selling weed or something. And, like, then, I'm saying get a lawyer, don't talk to them. The police can lie to you in Canada. Like, I'm giving, like, all this legal advice. I'm posting know your rights. All his social media is under surveillance at this point. So everybody who's communicating with him, we know is now, being watched. So anyway, he gets out. He gets back to his place, and they had left the Crime Stoppers tip behind. And it was like Andrew Butler. His name isn't Andrew, it's Drew. So it was a completely false tip that they didn't do any due diligence on, because the first time they Googled, they got prison, Coast, solitary, and that was enough, intelligence for them to assume that this was all real. So they didn't bother, checking to see that that wasn't actually his name, it wasn't like even the right address, so there was all these things. So I'm saying that story, and that can happen to anybody. So this happened in Halifax. And the only reason why we really know what happened is because they left the Crime Stoppers tip. Then he posts the Crime Stoppers tip on Facebook. Within 10 minutes, the police are back at his door. And they're like, that's illegal. You can't have that. And he's like, why did you leave it behind? But obviously, it's still surveilling social media. So, I mean, I'm saying this is serious, right? Now, because Drew is someone with a record, they may think that that's not that's not something, couldn't happen to us. But it was a completely false tip. No one knows where the tip came from. It was, bad information in the tip. They did no back checking to say, is any of this reliable? They did no surveillance. They didn't say, let's watch and see if this person, have they bought ammo lately? Have they bought guns? What is their social media activity? Have they called people? There was none of that. They literally just straight went in with the SWAT team. So I mean, I think that illustrates how alarming this is in terms of, not even that this, and as you were talking about intelligence, this isn't even about gathering intelligence. It's really, I mean, it's allegedly, ironically, this is an anti-terror bill that is about waging state terror upon citizens by any means necessary, through policing, through surveillance techniques, through information gathering, that we're being asked to accept as not only normal, but for our own security. So I guess I'll stop there for now.
So before we head into discussion, and I'll talk about that in a moment, I just want to remind you that we are seeking to start a Civil Liberties Association in Nova Scotia that might be able to both do public education and awareness on these issues, and also, hopefully at some point in the future, have some legal presence to be able to hold the abuse of authority to account. We would like you to sign up either for information on this or to work on it with us, because we're going to need a lot of help in a whole variety of ways. So Judy is going to start passing around the sign-up sheet. We'd appreciate it if you could sign up. What I think would be best to do at this point is I'd like to get a wide spectrum of people's thoughts and opinions. So maybe what we'll do is we'll take a few comments from the floor, and then we'll turn it back over to our panel to see if they wish to respond. If you have a particular question for the member of the panel, that's fine, but we'll take a few comments and then come back to the panel, just so that we can ensure we get as many people's voices out there as possible. So I'll turn it over to you. Yes?
How well is the police educated in what they can do and what they can't do? Because sometimes even with a small thing like going through an orange, right, or you just get caught in the red light, the attitude is just incredible, You're sort of
I'll repeat the question after.
So, how much training do they get and what they can do and what they can't do?
The question is essentially how much training do police actually get, and how well do they know what they are allowed or are not allowed to do. And maybe this is a problem having to do with police not knowing that, because their attitude is often very aggressive.
You should ask if there's any police in the room who can enlighten us. Any police here that can enlighten us?
I know you're not, but yeah, sure.
I'd just like to refer to an experience that my brother had to point out that it's not just a matter that the authorities collect this information, is that they don't guard that information. And this is an example I'm giving. They can be quite cavalier as to who they give that information to. My brother was going out with a woman who was quite active in housing just about 25 years ago, well before 9/11 and so forth. And she was also involved in a fairly rancorous divorce proceeding with this abusive husband, who happened to be, and I don't know the naval term, but it's like second in charge on one of these toy boats they have that the Navy has out here. And so in part of the back and forth, he more or less said, oh yeah, well if you do that, then I'm going to say that I'll go after Harry, and point out that he was at this rally at the so-and-so, and then he was at this rally a few months later, and he was down at the Grand Parade there, and he was doing this, and he was doing that. Meaning he picked up the phone, called CSIS or whoever it was, and say, what do you know about Harry? And got reported to, because he's not from his boat, he's not doing this surveillance, but he was high enough, and he's only, there's hundreds of people at his level. He just was able to pick up, get that phone, and that information is then cavalierly handed over, and that information then is used just in a civil way. And so it was you always know that this surveillance is out there, but this is an example, somewhat, it's kind of banal in a way, but the fact is it does exist, and all kinds of people are checking to justify their own existence, and so they're taking down names. And it just struck me that part of it. And the other part of it is that much of CSIS activities is commercial, like with the trouble that they got in Brazil, was they were doing all kinds of spying on Brazilian agencies and people, so that our Canadian mining companies could use that information. And so I think there's a part of the politics as not only as the Harper government and who he represents trying to terrorize us or create the fact that there is fear, but who are they also in service of in terms of using all kinds of illegal means just to advance the commercial interests of their buddies and the corporate clients. So it's not just don't break the law or terrorism. It seems to be the privatizing and monetizing all of it. Everything.
Quite. Other comments or questions? Yes.
Yeah, just a little comment with regard to the no-fly list. I have a 3-year-old grandson, and we were going as a family to Mexico, and we discovered that he was on the no-fly list. 3 years old. We were all kept behind as, 3 years old. So this is, as Judy was talking about, the no-fly. So I have a 3-year-old son who is on the no-fly list. He's now 6 years old. He's still on the no-fly list. Just for everybody's information, the reality of what this does, what we're talking about here, it's not just some random thing written made into law, but it affects people's lives. My grandson was born in Canada, and he's 3 years old on a no-fly list, but it's ridiculous. And just also the propaganda that's associated with this and how it's sold to the public. My son, who when he was in grade 12, was standing with a friend outside of our home, when springtime arrived, standing and doing the stalking. And a police car shows up and said, we got a call from one of the neighbors to say there's some suspicious activities going on here. And these two guys were, young guys standing there just talking, as you alluded to earlier, you could be talking about just about anything. And so he asked them, whose car is that? The cop asked them, and they related, this was the friend's car. And he said, the cop realized there was absolutely nothing going on. They were just two young guys talking. But this is the impact, because, you're Muslim, you have Muslim neighbors, so the neighbors call up and say there's Muslims, kid is standing outside with his friend and they are suspicious, that's all. Because the cop told them that we got a call from their neighbors to say that there was suspicious activity. That's it. So how it impacts people's lives, really, this is, you know, anybody.
Because everybody's fearful. We're afraid.
Yeah.
And
But I
that's what you
also
do.
think somebody just needs to mouth off a little bit and how it could escalate into a very serious problem. You know.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Krista Simon. I helped organize some of the Bill C-51 rallies here in conjunction with cities across Canada, both on the 14th of March and the 18th. And Judy was kind enough to speak there, and we get to meet for the first time, so that's really nice. So pleasant to see you all here coming out. I agree with you that we need to keep up public pressure. We need to keep protesting. I don't know if many of you know much about Anonymous. Anonymous, believe it or not, is being thrown under the bus here too. They get left out a lot when it comes to I Will Know More and other marginalized groups. But believe it or not, they do incredible work here and around the world, and they're going to be thrown under the bus with this too. So I just want to throw that out there, that they're being left out because they really are on our side, and we really need them on our side right now. They do covert work, but they do it on behalf of humanity, and I do believe what they do is good work. I just want to say two quick things besides doing constant pressure. So maybe another rally in another month, for example, is to keep petitioning. And there could be something May 30th, so keep your lookout. And if this turns into something, if the civil liberties in Halifax turns into something, we can certainly keep talking more in person about how to get something going on the 30th. So another national rally could appear on the 30th, for example. We're looking for tens of thousands this time, and the numbers are only increasing. So pleased to see that across Canada, that people are getting up from their TVs and their seats and caring about something, because Harper has accused us of not caring about anything or paying attention to anything. So thanks for paying attention. One more quick thing. The city of Calgary had their city council approached by members who've been working with me nationally to deny the application of the federal law in their community and their district. They're meeting with them May 1st or May 4th, I believe is Monday. So they're meeting with them early May to discuss the application of this process. So I don't know if it's a bill or an act of its own, but we're looking at district power, community power, superseding federal law application. So I'd like to bring this, once this starts developing in their city, I'd like to bring this as precedent, if they're successful, to cities all across Canada. So I just want to mention that there are remedies to this if we keep positive and we keep going and we keep educating others, because you'll see that the more people who learn about this bill, the more people who are upset with it, and we have every right to be. So thanks for being here, and I'm really, really so pleased to see that this Civil Liberties Association is being begun. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just for those of you who aren't familiar, Anonymous is the name of a global hacktivist group, hackers who use their technological skills in order to confront the powerful. A very impressive movement which has risen in the last few years. Any other final comments before we turn it back over to our panel? There'll be another opportunity afterwards. Yes?
I find the one thing that, one of the most dangerous things is a lot of people don't understand rights, the concept of rights as opposed to privilege, and they don't understand the concept of privacy as it relates.
It's the coffee, I'm sure, this time.
Good afternoon. Please join us for Cartography of the Commons, beginning at 2 p.m. in the RBC Learning Lab on the 3rd floor. Everyone is welcome. Thank you.
How come they didn't announce us?
Right here.
Anyway, really, even educated people, even professors, do not understand what rights mean and the absolutivity of rights. People still think of them as privileges, and one of the dangers of C-51 is it reconceptualizes rights as privileges. So you have the right to these rights as long as you're a good person. But the bad people don't have the right to these rights. And people will accept that. And as I'm saying, even so-called educated people do not understand. So that's one of the most important things that a Civil Liberties Association has to do.
did you want?
Could I just briefly say about human rights? Rights to what and rights to do what? I think people, like human beings, have an inherent right, because they are human beings, to not be bullied by government, to be violated.
So I'm going to turn it back over to our panel to make some comments. Before I do that, I just want to, because I know some people will start to filter out, I want to tell you about a couple of upcoming events that are somewhat tied to this event. There will likely be more demonstrations against C-51. There are a number of petitions going around, which I encourage you to find online. On one of the, all of those of us who are on the panel at one point or another have worked in universities, and so one of the rights that we take very seriously is the right to academic freedom, which includes the right for academics not to be surveilled, but also for academics to be able to speak out on important public issues and help organize events like this one without fear of repercussions, ideally. And so on Monday, some of you might know that the Nova Scotia Liberal Government, as part of their ambitious plans to reconfigure the province, has introduced Bill 100, which will essentially allow, among other things, the government to step in and reorganize universities, basically throwing out the collective agreements of faculty unions and other unions on campuses. This could presumably be used as a means to undermine the academic freedom of professors. So many of us and many other people in the growing anti-austerity movement of the province will be at Province House at 4 p.m. on Monday, protesting against this bill C-100. Then on Tuesday morning at 8 a.m., many of us will be out at the ferry terminal on the Halifax side. Some people may in fact be dressed in caps and gowns, which will be fun to see, protesting again and asking for people to support academic and university workers as they struggle against this bill. And very briefly, there's a number of other events coming up in the series, the Radical Imagination series, which is one of the co-organizers of this event. On May 9th, which is a Saturday, there'll be a Reimagining Motherhood event for Mother's Day, talking about the politics of mothering and what it means today. On May 11th, there will be a film screening with the internationally acclaimed artists Carol Condé and Carl Beveridge about art that's made with workers. And on May 20th, at the Company House pub on Gottingen Street, there will be a visiting speakers talking about the history of gentrification. And this Monday evening, if you're not already exhausted from the 4 p.m. demonstration at Province House, you can come back to the library where we're going to have a double-header film. The first is Remember Africville, about the community here in Halifax, the 1991 film, and then a newer film called My Brooklyn, about the effects of gentrification on Brooklyn, New York. So, plenty to do. Never a dull moment. And with that, we'll turn it back over to our panel if anyone wishes to make some comments.
Yeah, okay, so there are two things I wanted to talk about, prompted by some of the comments from all of you. First was the issue about police training that was raised earlier. I was really intrigued that this came up. And the other is I want to talk about the problem of chill. So first on police training. I've had clashes both officially and unofficially with the RCMP from time to time, most notably not just in my law practice, but when the G7 finance ministers met in Nova Scotia more than a decade ago, and there were demonstrations on the Grand Parade which ended up with the police tear gassing the demonstrators. And so on behalf of those who had been tear gassed, I filed a complaint with the RCMP Complaints Commission in order to try and follow this up. And this was a kind of intriguing experience because it tended to show the weakness, as many others have identified, of the oversight entity that is supposed to keep an eye on the RCMP. They weren't very effective in dealing with the complaint that I filed, although ultimately they did agree that the RCMP should not have used tear gas without first issuing a warning. And I was assured in the letter that I received about 2 years after I filed my initial complaint that the officers in charge had been given further training. Well, you know, very nice. So, but this gets to the idea of the training of police and what it is that they understand their job to be. I have to say that I think being a police officer at any level is a hugely difficult job. And it's difficult because they have to deal with a wide range of situations, but they also have to have a serious understanding of the multitude of laws that they have to enforce, that are laws that create infractions, but they also have to understand that they operate within the context of a free and open society in which we have a Charter of Rights and in which things like gatherings are charter protected, in which freedom of speech is a charter protected right, and that standing around on the basis of fairly flimsy evidence is in full riot gear and being prepared, itching to throw tear gas at people is generally not a good idea. And but there are many weaknesses in the training that low-level officers and their superior officers get, which means that they are left in some circumstances to craft for themselves, according to the culture of their organization, what it is they approve of and what they disapprove of. And this is not a desirable way to go. I have thought for many years that it ought to be, although I have to say this is not a guarantee of anything, it ought to be a preliminary requirement for anyone to go work for a police force that they have a university degree. So one of the things that this would mean is that they wouldn't be 18 or 19 coming out of high school and going and spending a short amount of time at the police college and then going to work essentially as muscle in a police force. That although muscle is undoubtedly useful downtown when you're dealing with people who are drunk and vomiting in the on the streets, this is not the essence of the job. This is something that even there has to operate within a context in which you understand what it is that you're dealing with, and you have a kind of grasp of the context. I'm not saying a university degree is a guarantee of this, but at least it passes the time for a few years in the hopes that people will in fact mature during that time and maybe even be exposed to a broader range of thinking. But this is not something that is always the case. So this is on the question of training. There's lots of evidence to suggest that many police officers who should know better simply don't, even commanders. So the second thing I want to turn to was the point about the chill. There are many forms of social control. And distraction, for example, is a very potent form of social control. So that means if it makes your brain hurt to kind of think about politics or the situation in which you find yourselves, you can go shop, or you can turn on the television or the internet, and between shopping and entertainment, there's lots to distract you because then you don't have to think about this very much. There is propaganda, there is outright oppression, there's fear of others, but then the one I think we have to be particularly on guard against is self-censorship. And self-censorship is what emerges from oppressive laws like Bill C-51 or the existence of a security apparatus that shows its teeth to the public from time to time, because then people choose to be timid. They choose not to say the things that they think. They choose not to gather in little groups of 2 or 3 where the neighbor might phone up and report them in. They choose either not to belong to a union or not to really participate in it, or they choose not to go to a demonstration, or they choose at their church groups not to engage with political issues, or they if they're of visible racial minorities, minority, then they choose to try and impose a type of behavior on themselves in which they try not to be noticed, they try not to stand out in any way. Or if they're journalists, they worry about the exposure of their sources, or they choose to write about stories that are anodyne, that really don't have much bite to them, rather than to actually push on things that are important and worthwhile investigating, because of the possibility of pushback or the possibility of ending up on a blacklist that limits your employment prospects. So these are things that I think we really have to worry about, but not just worry about, but in fact take action against. So that the more it is that people actually participate in public talk or public demonstrations, or write articles if they're journalists about things that require, that have some bite to them, the more we have a kind of sloshing around of the exercise of our freedoms that sets the tone for the kind of society we want to live in. And if we don't do that, if we don't exercise the rights, then they will wither away. Not that they'll be taken out of the Charter of Rights. They'll still be there so that we can kind of wave them around. But all our charter rights are subject to Section 1 of the Charter that says that they're subject to statutory limits that can be demonstrated as needed but still in a free and a democratic society. Meaning that the charter rights are not absolute, and what we'll get is more and more eating away of those rights through laws like Bill C-51. So what we need is to make sure that we continue to exercise those rights. Otherwise, they will, if not entirely wither away, then certainly be eaten into to the point where our society has transformed itself and in a way that makes it very hard to get back to where it is that we want to go. We've seen this in other societies, and we don't want to go there. Yes, did you have your hand up?
Just when you guys were talking about the police and the training and things
yes.
like that. One thing to keep in mind is that they're fed the subliminal stuff and the videos, the violence, so that when they get into a certain, position or what have you, that they're not going to react like, say, you would or I would. They're going to react like as if this is a very volatile situation and things like that. One guy that I know that is anonymous, and he's an officer, he basically told me that, because one point I was saying, like, it's nurses and people that work in hospitals, people who work in bars, I mean, they deal with situations that are really bad, and they don't go shooting people or, killing people like that. They de-escalate, and then if they have to handle it, they handle it. They don't use, like, guns and, you know what I mean, like, things like that. So if, somebody like my size can take down a guy that's over 6 feet tall, and I don't need to pull out my baton or anything, then there's an issue with that, or I can talk them down. So, but one point that he made to me was that, the police are fed the videos, you know what I mean, the subliminal stuff and things like that, so that every situation they look at it from, like this could potentially escalate, and so that's the fight or flight part of the brain that gets activated, things like that. So when you think about, okay, well, why can't they just get trained better? It's like, no, their mindset is in a totally different frame. So, you really look at your own safety, you know what I mean, from your own perspective, and just kind of go with that. Do you know what I mean?
I think beyond that too is that, the misconception that the police are actually in place to protect or serve anyone. I mean, they are there. Their function is to terrorize working class and communities of color. That is what they do. So when they're using, or Muslim communities as well, so when they're using this force, it's not an error. It's not an individual officer that just isn't trained or oops. That is actually what they're there to do. I mean, we see this function in Tavis, in Toronto, in the gang policing, where, like, they deliberately do this stuff. I mean, that's what they're there for. So I think it's also, and I mean, that's why I'm an advocate for community-controlled policing. So, like, we can have that discussion. The police should be answerable to their communities, and we should be able to hire and fire police officers in our own communities and be controlling the policing. It's the most important job in our communities. I don't see why it's imposed upon us. But so there's that point. On the point of rights, yeah, I mean, it's funny too, because I'm coming out of like a university. And I was having all these conversations with guys in jail and stuff, and I used to be on that rights thing too. No, they have to adjudicate you within 72 hours, and they just laugh at me, you know what I mean? Like, they just be like, are you serious? Like, you think I'm going to go in there and tell the captain that I can't be put on the level because they adjudicated me at 80 hours, But, so, I mean, I think we also, yes, like, we are entitled to our rights. I think and again, this is a function of class power and various forms of power as well, that like you can know your rights, it doesn't matter. I mean, like, and I go back to the prisons and jails, like they have the right to get mail, but good luck getting it, you know, good luck sending it out. I know a guy whose mail is being completely blocked by the jail, and there's nothing anybody can do about it, like, unless I suppose he got a lawyer and spent 2 years going through court, maybe, you know, and who does prison law? Like nobody does it anyway, so you're not going to find a lawyer, right? And then to do what? To be retaliated upon the guards and sent into Salter. So I mean, and I think that is also a growing thing, no matter how much we know our rights. I think and again, it's kind of like a middle class, and I think white perception, like these ideas that like, you know, the police are our rights, are there, and we can like just have them, and I'm like, they're really not, you know, like they remove them when they want to remove them. So yeah, and I also think, I also want to add in a class analysis as well. So I think that we've been talking about this a lot. I think it's also important to acknowledge that a lot of particularly surveillance type techniques have been enacted, particularly in working class workplaces for a long time as well. So I think a lot of this stuff, in a sense, like it's not at the top down, like this law is being made and then these things will happen. In a sense, it's like there's a culture of these things happening that is now being put into law. I think it's almost backwards in that sense, that these practices are active. So I mean, I know people that work retail that they send, you know, mystery shoppers in on them, and it's like literally just somebody to, you know, come and see if you're working right. Like your boss doesn't trust you that you're doing your job, so, you know, they send somebody in and like that person reports. You know, this is common culture if you work in retail. You know, this is common culture for people that work, you know, McDonald's, like all these low-paid jobs where like it's normal to have like a block on your computer so that you know, to check what you're doing. This assumption that you're doing something wrong, and the job of your workplace is to catch you, and that you're not entitled to the assumption that you're actually a good worker or that you actually are following the rules. You know, and that it's a very class-based thing that has been used on the working class people in low-paid positions forever. And again, that sort of culture of like, let's assume you're a wrongdoer, and let's gather all these things on you and survey you and do this, and then if it amount, you know, and so I think that's important too. That it's not that this law is creating something new necessarily, although what's new is putting it into law, but it's almost picking up on these things that have been active in our culture and then institutionalizing it further.
Yeah, I just wanted, if I could ask the panelists, if I think you all in one way or another have said that this doesn't, that Bill C-51 isn't some radical shift in the practices of Canadian security, but you've all spoken about it's being ratcheted up. And I kind of want to know what you mean by that. Is it about, as Elle says, is it about a bunch of practices that were formally speaking kind of illegal, but nonetheless practiced? Are they now becoming formally legal? Is that what you mean by ratcheting up? Or you just
well, just an example, and this is minor compared to the things that I was just talking about. Yeah. Well, for instance, it used to be that you could only be held without a warrant for 3 days. Now you're going to be held for 7 days. So somebody who's a nice law-abiding citizen is going to say, oh, well, 3 days, 7 days is not particularly serious. But that's one of the things about this new law. And I can pick away and I can show you how certain things are a little more extreme, you know. And of course we would say, well, a little more extreme. But it's sort of like, I think my husband was saying earlier about the frog in the boiling water, or in the hot water boiling, you know. We swim in a certain sea right now where everything's kind of okay most of the time, and then we see something and we're jolted and we think it's one bad apple, and then we go back to reset, which is square one, which is we're in the lukewarm water, and then there's reset, you know, all of these kinds of things. I just wanted to say something that would maybe inform you a lot about how the police are trained and educated. I would say the single largest trainer of the police is American television cop shows. That's my guess.
Yes, at the back.
I'd like to comment about just the general culture of apathy that is seems to be prevailing in the general Canadian community.
Shout!
Yes, it's hard to hear you out there.
I'd like to comment about the general apathy. I'd like to pick up the gentleman at the corner, I don't know the name, but he brought in a very interesting aspect about excellence. I feel that if we are going to be effective as a civil liberties group, irrespective of what our agenda may be, because we all have different agendas. If as Canadians standing up for civil liberties, they're going to be effective, I think we need to re-examine our own selves. The general public seems to be very suspicious about all these activists that are out doing all this good non-profit business. And so, how do we do that? I have no idea. This group can come up with it. The other thing is the interesting thing about the excellence. I think if we are calling for a shift in the excellence of, say, recruitment of the police officers to graduate level, now they have been recruited from college level and high school level. So their mind, I agree with you, their minds are very malleable, they can be used as tools of oppression very easily without questioning authority. Some of them are good folk, some of them are, but many of them, when it comes to choice between standing up for the community and standing up for their jobs or their paycheck, then it becomes a very easy choice to, it's against the community instead of for the community. So, the question is, how can we improve our own culture of excellence so that we have repute with the general public? Then we can appeal to them and they can join. We not only advocate for them, but they can feel that we speak for them, and together hopefully we can become like a movement towards standing up for Canada, towards standing up for civil liberties, towards standing up for human rights, which she mentioned, which is the broader aspect, or towards standing up for constitutional rights or freedoms and justice, social justice in general.
I just had a comment coming back to the rights and not understanding them. I know in the United States, under the social insurance program that they have, it falls under a class called, oh sorry. In the United States, with the social insurance program that they have, it falls, once you enter that social insurance program, it enters you under a state of corpus maximum dominius, which is actually a state of, you change from citizen to bondage to the government. They can imprison you and invoke any of your 3 inalienable rights at any time that they want. Yeah, the thing is you have to volunteer yourself into the system at some point. Usually people do that when they get their social insurance number, not knowing it, and they revoke the rights then. Because the way that, and I believe it's the same here in Canada, that we're under maritime admiral law, aren't we? Are we not?
I'm not sure what you're meaning, but anyway, go ahead. Finish your...
I know in this is the model for the States, and I've noticed here in Canada, it seems the same on the paperwork. Like if your name's spelt in all, like regular English, first uppercase letter and then the rest small on your birth certificate, that was before you had a social insurance number. And any legal piece of documentation, if your name's in all capital letters, it represents a corporation. So at some point when you got your SIN number, you volunteered yourself into the system and you became a corporation under the federal government of Canada. And now they can act on you in court and act on the person, even though you're only there representing the union that's on that code. So
okay, I think I'm going to deal with the other question, which I think has to do with the problem of whether there's general public support for civil liberties, if I understood you correctly. And this is a real problem in a way, because a lot of people find it quite easy not to think about difficult problems from day to day of the sort that we're talking about here. A lot of people have enough difficulties in their lives getting a job and holding it, making a living, paying their bills, taking care of their families, dealing with their health, whatever the general problems are that we all have to confront from day to day. These things are overwhelming. And so a lot of people, in fact, either don't think about the issues that we've been talking about, or their instinct is probably to think that this is for someone else, that the people who are likely to be the target of any kind of oppression are going to be someone else. It's going to be the other person. It's going to be someone that they somehow don't identify with. They think that they're isolated, they're insulated from it, and you know, they may well be. It may be that for most people, they won't be the target of any kind of overt oppressive acts emanating from clandestine government agencies. But you know, that shouldn't stop anyone else who is concerned about these issues. And this is true, I think, of any social dynamic, of any issue that's of importance out there, is that it's rare that you get thousands and thousands of people marching in the streets or all thinking the same thing at the same time. It often happens that it's relatively smallish groups of people that have informed themselves and decide that they're going to engage with a particular problem and start pushing it. They start pushing the agenda. And this is first, I think it shouldn't be a barrier for anyone. That is, no one should feel embarrassed that they're speaking up about issues if they identify them as important. And as a lot of social activists have concluded over years, that it's often a small group that will be successful in achieving change, and that frequently it's relatively rare that anything else actually works. So although I'm happy to get mass support in any form. I mean, heck, I ran for office for years and years and got elected, so I had to get kind of mass support in some way, someone ticking my name on a ballot. But it's not a prerequisite to actually moving on something. In the environmental field, where I've also worked for years, essentially you do the work because you think it's the right work to do. And I think this is true about civil liberties as well, that people have to keep pushing the agenda because they've concluded that it's important and it requires the work to be done.
I think we're drawing to a close so we can get out of here at 2:30, but I guess I'll let that... Oh, there's a hand in the back. Yes.
I just wanted to say, if I was a young person today, just graduating, I wouldn't get involved in anything because everything is monitored. To get a job now, they're checking your credit rating. So imagine you have a bad credit. Are you involved in civil problems? And I would back off of everything because the job is probably the most important thing in their life at that point.
See, I worry about that. I'm really sorry to hear you say that because I think it's exactly what it is that I think we have to kind of push back against. I'm not saying that you're wrong, that these things can't be monitored. Of course they can be monitored, and that's just a hard reality about the nature of the internet, and never mind, you know, whether wiretapping or illegal searches or mail openings. I mean, the internet itself is sufficiently powerful as a surveillance tool to allow lots of information to be gathered. And I also, I mean, to a certain extent, I agree that young folks who often don't necessarily exercise the best judgment are maybe a little reckless about what they put up on the internet. But you know, if we withdraw entirely, then that's kind of the self-censorship I was talking about before. If you withdraw entirely, you essentially give up the game. You essentially say, that's it. You know, I'm prepared to be intimidated, and I'm prepared to allow myself not to say what I think, and not to engage in the free flow of ideas, and not to talk with my fellow citizens about what it is that's on my mind. So I find that problematic. I hope, in fact, that young folks will be prepared to get out there and share their ideas and say to each other what it is that they do think about things, because it's in that kind of clash back and forth of ideas that people refine their ideas, mature, develop, figure out what's important, and build their lives ultimately. So I have actually high hopes for the good side of the internet and our possibilities of worldwide communication. I think, in fact, there are lots of examples out there of really brilliant people who are talking to each other and saying what they think. And I only wish I could use the machines better so I could kind of figure out what it is. So I'm hoping people the young people especially don't abandon it. Anyway, sorry, I talked too much.
Judy, a final word before we adjourn?
Oh no, I was just going to say on that though, I think, because I feel like every time I'm at a meeting, people talk about like, why aren't the young activists? And I'm like, but people don't really support the young activists when they're doing things. I think building those mutual networks of, if you want to call it self-care networks or whatever, I don't know. But, I mean, like, dude, I don't have a job, I've lost, like, multiple jobs, and then it's like, so it's real. Like, it's not some hypothetical. Like, you do lose jobs, and you cannot pay your bills, and you are out there by yourself. And people who are saying, like, yeah, do that, like, you totally speak out, like, they're not there for you when you can't pay your rent. Like, that's real. So I think part of also organization and struggle is how do we build mutual networks of support? Like, if we're academics supporting free speech, how do we support colleagues when they're, like, going down on this stuff? And we've seen, like, who's that guy that got, the Palestinian guy that got, fired from the... Yeah, I know this is increasing. I'm saying that, but it's not, that's really public, but it's also happening very gently in that sense, who's just not getting like, and there's not, you don't really see people sort of opposing that and coming and standing together. And I think on all those aspects, like, it's one thing to say, speak out, do this thing, and it's another thing to say, like, what are the real consequences of that? So also part of, I think, building organizations has to be saying how are we supporting each other through those times. I think that's a really important piece. Omri has to say.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to echo what you're saying. I think, honestly, you two were engaging in a trope, and I think that's a very dangerous way of thinking, or lack of thinking. To be honest. I think that when you look at the reality of the situation, is that the older generation has in a lot of ways abandoned the younger generation because of this lack of any sort of institutional support for young people engaging in social change. I know that for myself, I've been blessed to be in a family that actually carried on traditions, but I think a lot of people are feeling that disconnect between an older generation and a younger generation. I think when we talk about lack of filter on the internet or a general sense of fear, I would say it's actually more so on the side of older people. There's a tremendous amount of fear from white upper middle class or middle class people of losing what little privilege that they've gained. And I would say that young people, by and large, aren't as much engaged in that. And I think what we have to actually do is up the ante in terms of our expectations for what social movements can do for us. I also just think that it's important to not try and engage in this sort of false dichotomy, right, of the young and the old. It doesn't quite make sense, especially given how few of us actually have job prospects, whether we're 40 or 20. Yeah.
I do want to bring it to a close because I did promise some people that we would finish at 2:30. So I would just remind you, if you haven't yet signed up, please do sign up on the yellow sheet over here. It has gone around, and I hope you will sign up. We will be organizing more educational events in the future. We need everyone's help in order to build a robust organization.